this article came up this week, and I just thought it was interesting. It has to do with the Johnson Amendment. And I've made a video about this recently. I'm not going to go over everything, but basically, the Johnson Amendment is the rule that the IRS is supposed to enforce that says nonprofit groups cannot endorse a political candidate from the pulpit, from their place of business, whatever. They're not supposed to make political endorsements. You get a tax exemption, and in return, you're not supposed to tell people who to vote for. That's what the rule says. But as we've known in recent years, a lot of conservative Christians have hated that rule. They want to use church to be an arm of the Republican Party. They want to endorse candidates. They have endorsed Republican candidates. And then they tell the IRS, hey, guess what? We just did this. You want to come after us and revoke our tax exemption? Do it. We dare you, because they want to sue and get this in front of the Supreme Court in the hopes that the Supreme Court will say, sure, churches can endorse whoever they want to. But the thing is, it's never, the rule that the IRS has doesn't say churches can endorse political candidates. It says nonprofits cannot endorse political candidates. Planned Parenthood cannot send out a mailing telling you who to vote for, even if you think the choice is obvious from their perspective. Neither can the NRA. But white evangelical churches think this is their birthright, that they can tell you who to vote for. And the reason I talked about this not that long ago, like 2 months ago, is because basically in a court filing, the Trump-run IRS told the courts, we are not going to enforce the Johnson Amendment. And so if churches want to endorse candidates, guess what? We're not coming after them. Now, the thing you need to know about that is the Johnson Amendment is still on the books. They haven't taken that out. But a guy who runs the IRS is basically saying, we're closing our eyes whenever anyone violates it for the time being. So it's open season for right-wing churches to tell you which Republican to vote for. And that's why that news was so disturbing 2 months ago, because even though the IRS has never historically gone after churches that tell you who to vote for, they were supposed to. They said they would do it, but they never have. And there's no evidence they've ever taken action when a church has done that. But now the IRS is saying, yeah, listen, we're not going to do anything. Now, what happens if there is a Democratic administration in the future? Like that's ever going to happen again? If that were to happen, the new IRS commissioner could just say, the rule's on the books and we're going to enforce it. But for now, the Trump IRS says we're not going to enforce it. Okay, so that's what we talked about a couple of weeks ago. And then the New York Times this week shared this particular story of this man right here. His name is Jonathan Barker, and he is a minister who really wanted to endorse a candidate from the pulpit recently. And you can see from the headline, he tried to endorse from the pulpit. He wound up without a church. And this is where it gets fascinating, because what Barker says, he's an outspoken liberal. He had written a sermon urging AOC to run for president in 2028, which, by the way, I love that idea. But his denomination, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, ELCA, was not so ready. As a result, when Sunday came, Pastor Barker was no longer the pastor of Grace Lutheran. So here we have a liberal minister who says, oh, we can endorse candidates from the pulpit now? I would like to do that. Not even one who's on the ballot, but I'm going to make up a hypothetical scenario a few years from now that I would like to see happen. And basically the church said, haha, you're fired. Like he ended up having to deliver his sermon across the street from the church to like 4 people or something. But he didn't have that job anymore. And the reason that is interesting is because this is what I worry about with the Johnson Amendment being not enforced. Because here's my prediction of what's going to happen. And I said this before. What you will see is white evangelical churches, Southern Baptist churches, are going to become arms of the Republican Party, especially come election season. All they're going to talk about is the upcoming elections. They're not going to talk about Jesus. No one in those churches gives a shit about Jesus. They're only going to tell you who to vote for, not just like your Senate seat, your House seat, governor, anything in the midterms, they're going to talk about school board races, city council races, and they're going to make every single sermon tailored to who you should vote for, because that's what they think church is now. On the flip side, the handful of churches that would actually support more Democratic candidates are the ones who are going to, like, when they go low, we go high. They're the ones who are going to say, no, we're going to talk about the gospel message, and we're going to talk about Jesus, and we're going to avoid politics, because in the best case scenario, the way they put it, in their best interest, they believe the gospel rises above politics. That we're not talking about what's happening on earth. We're talking about how to get to heaven and how you should be a good Christian. So my fear is that more liberal churches are not going to make any endorsements because they don't think churches should make endorsements. And they're right. But this is now an asymmetric game. They're not on the same playing field. This is why I appreciate what Gavin Newsom is doing in California right now with the gerrymandering in California. Go all out. Shut out every Republican you can in order to nullify what Texas is doing, because you don't win a prize for not playing the game. I think Dan Savage has said this. Democrats do not exist in order to be role models for Republicans. No, you got to fight fire with fire. And again, if liberal churches do not endorse Democratic candidates, but conservative churches overwhelmingly endorse Republicans, we are not on the same playing field. And that's what I think is going to happen next year in the midterms. So here we have a pastor who wanted to give an endorsement, a hypothetical endorsement to AOC, and he basically lost his job because of it. There was another pastor who was interviewed, and this is the whole we got to go high bullshit. The power of the pulpit should not be used to make free debate feel unsafe, Reverend O said. She added, just because we can would not necessarily mean we should endorse. Like, why aren't you at that point? Like, I also think there are a couple reasons you should take that seriously, though, because you can imagine if some church out there said, hey, everyone, during the midterms, you should go after you should vote for the Democratic candidates on the ballot up and down for every single position. Do you think the Trump administration would say, well, the Johnson Amendment is not enforced, so I guess we cannot go after them? Or do you think the Trump administration would say, the rules don't apply to us, but they definitely apply to you, and we're going to revoke your tax exempt status? I think that's a very real possibility. So I understand why some liberal churches may not want to engage in this game. I do not like the excuse that we shouldn't do this because it's the wrong thing to do, because I think now you're just ceding ground to the Republicans. But there was one other thing too. This is noted in the article. Now, after the IRS statement, he felt like liberal churches were about to lose a political battle by refusing to play. This is Barker again, the pastor from the beginning. There is 18,000 that's ready to go, he said, referring to the ranks the Family Research Council is trying to organize on the right. And there's none of us ready to go. That's the concern. That is also what I am worried about, because all these right-wing churches are going to become arms of the Republican Party. And if liberal churches do not follow suit, then you're just making the world worse for everybody. The one thing I did not know until I read this, though, this is interesting. And this, I kind of get where the ELCA higher-ups are coming from. Most evangelical Lutheran churches share the same tax exemption, dealing with the IRS as a single entity rather than church by church. And this is why Republicans have it so good. If one megachurch, if one Southern Baptist megachurch, Robert Jeffress's church in Texas, says we want you all of you in the audience, all of you watching on the live stream, because you know they broadcast this shit to everyone on YouTube too and Facebook. If he says, I want all of you to vote for a Republican candidate, what's the worst that could happen in an IRS that is run by competent people? That church loses their tax exempt status. But in ELCA, if one pastor does the same thing for a Democratic candidate, the entire denomination could lose its tax exempt status, and that would be a death blow to the entire denomination. So I do understand why they want this dude to shut up because it's not just his church that would suffer, it's the entire denomination. But also, I don't really have anything more to add to this, but we talk about this asymmetric warfare, and we got to fight fire with fire when it comes to gerrymandering. But when it comes to the Johnson Amendment, we're seeing the same battle play out, where one side's going to go all in on telling people who to vote for, and the left is absolutely not going to do that because it's the right thing to do. And what do we win by playing by the rules? Nothing. I don't know what the solution is for Jonathan Barker, because he's in a bad position right there, because he's part of a much larger organization, whereas megachurches are usually non-denominational. They're on their own. They do their own thing. But it was just a frustrating article to read. And just wanted to share that with you. I don't know what the solution is, but there you go. That's all I had for today. I'll take any last questions here. Why are the idiots louder than the people who talk sense? That is a good title for a book that describes our politics for the last decade. I mean, the idiots can't get by on their logic, on making a coherent argument. Loudness is all they have. It's why Trump types in all caps all the time, and why Gavin Newsom's social media people mock him by writing in all caps all the time, because that's what dumb people do. By the way, I also write in all caps if I'm writing by hand. So who am I to talk?